Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Hans Pearson, CEO of the Store Local Group.
And I'm Mark Gregg, I'm the National Head of Revenue for Store Local.
In light of recent events, we thought we'd get some experts from all around the globe to share their experiences and give us something to take away and apply it into our businesses over the coming days and weeks.
We're really excited, so let's get into it.
Well, hi everyone, how are we going? Mark Gregg and Hans Pearson from Store Local here. And we're delighted to have Scott Jensen from Adigma, based in Salt Lake City, Utah, joining us today, all the way from cold Utah, in the middle of the COVID-19 lockdown. And we're delighted to have Scott join us and talk a bit about his background as a really preeminent marketing expert in self-storage in the US, share some of his experiences of the current market, and what he's seeing amongst some of his customers and across the industry broadly in the US. So welcome, Scott. How are you going?
Doing really well, all things considered. We're about 2 weeks into locking things down a little bit or tightening things down here. Kids have been out of school. It's normally be in school right now, and they're now doing school from home. And the first week was a little rough, but the second week, we figured out how to get into a little bit of a schedule and a routine, and I think we've got things tightened up a little bit. We're coming up with kind of daily challenges for them to see if we can keep them entertained and try new stuff. And in some ways, I think yesterday I tried to see if I could pay them. Well, the last one out of the tent that I set up in the backyard, granted, it's about 25 degrees here Fahrenheit. Last one out of the tent, then I paid $50 to. And it bought me about 2.5 hours of free time to myself after they had done their schoolwork. So we're making do.
It's a crazy world right now. Well done. Survival tactics, family style.
That's right.
Well done.
Exactly.
Well, Scott, again, thanks for joining us. Be great if you could just share with us a bit about your background in self-storage, and obviously take the opportunity to tell us a bit about your company, Adigma, which specialises in marketing for self-storage, amongst other industries.
Sure, happy to. Probably start with the background a little bit. I've been doing marketing for the majority of my career, going back to, and digital marketing specifically, 1995, 96 area. Things were just getting started. I mean, that's a ways back, and some of the things we used to do is pretty comical now looking back that far, when things were just barely getting started, and moving from there. I was in that until doing a couple different marketing things until I went to work for Extra Space Storage, based here in Salt Lake City, around 2005, where I ran digital marketing, eventually call centers and things like our integrations with revenue management and our forecasting and some of our long-term strategy pieces, but really focused around, because Extra Space at that point still does focus quite a bit on marketing, and was there through 2008, 2009, when everything kind of really slowed down. We hit that big recession, and then was part of the process to kind of help pull out of that for about 3 years after that point, before moving on to some other industries. So I had done that, and then about 3 years ago now, two partners of I went and started Adigma, which is a digital marketing agency. And the majority, almost a little over half of our clients, are self-storage related. So we're still very much involved with it. We have a clientele that spreads from kind of small mom and pops that have one or two facilities, to some of our clients have as many as 275, almost 300 locations as well. So we kind of get the gamut there, and work with a number of different people within the industry, keeping track and tabs and really focused in on it.
And that's great, Scott. And so what are you seeing in the industry right now? Like, dial back a month or two, very different to where we are right now. And I know Mark and I are seeing across our stores across Australia a market difference in all markets. Curiously quite positive here in Australia, I must say, in terms of trading, and that seems to be a pretty common experience. But if you just talk us through what the vibe is, if you like, the restrictions, the shutdowns. How are self-storage operators reacting to that in the US?
Yeah, so we're seeing quite a bit of different things. So it probably should be clear. First of all, we need to remind people that we are, and we kind of talked about this, and the jacket kind of says so, we're still just coming out of our winter, right? And so here at my house, it snowed about 4 inches this morning. And it's still kind of that piece is we're just coming into spring here. From a COVID-19 standpoint, we are about 2 weeks into where people are starting to take it seriously. So a couple of things happened, I think, that really impacted things here. So you had Tom Hanks and his wife that they were there in Australia when they came out and announced that they had contracted it, and then here there are a couple of NBA players came out and said, "Hey, we've got it as well." People kind of stood up and took notice, and I think it got real for people really quick at that point. When that happened, then different states here within the states started reacting differently. You have some that are much more on one level, where you have New York and California, which have shut things down significantly, where it's all non-essential business has been closed off. Essential businesses being things like pharmacies and grocery stores and those things. And then you have some that are more the other end, which haven't really placed any restrictions at all. Here in Utah, where I'm at, I'd say we're middle of the road. They closed schools down, like I said, about 2 weeks ago. Most of the people that can work from home have. We've taken all of our offices, and all of our people are working from home now and have been doing so for about 2 weeks. Worked out well for us. We were prepared for it, and our employees are more than capable, and we encourage people to work from home for some time anyway. We usually keep office hours where people come in regularly, but working from home isn't something new for us. So there's been a little bit of I think last week it was a wait and see. From a storage standpoint, we saw demand was really strong last week still. This week, I would say, now we're only Wednesday into it, from when we're recording this, looking at the numbers today, and we can get into some more details on this, we're starting to see a little bit of a softening in demand. And that's not surprising, considering that there's typically about a 14-day lead to somebody when they first start looking at this to when they actually convert. And if last week being a little bit, I probably was kind of capturing the people from the week before. This week, we're starting to see the slowdown from last week when people kind of really started to slow down overall. So that's, I would say, the general overview, and we can go into a lot more detail on things as we go through this. But the overview, I think, is not only the people, but most of our clients are a little bit in a wait and see approach still. The U.S. government just passed today a stimulus bill, in which they are going to start sending checks out to individual families, and they have some bailouts from medium and small businesses. There'll be some packages for some of the larger businesses as well. That just happened today. I don't think anybody's really understood the full economic impact of what that could be yet, to see what it does to the markets or to how people react. But that's still just now starting to roll out, and people will get a feel for that. But I think for the most part, the general population and our clients are still in kind of a wait and see mode.
Scott, can I ask you a question? And you're saying then is a wait and see. So from a customer's perspective, what are some of the operators actually doing to actually inform their customers in relation to what's actually happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can give you probably a handful of different things, and then let's talk a little bit about how those things are impacted and draw on some of our past experience and how that reflects on things. So I was talking to a former colleague of mine at Extra Space who now runs a large portfolio. Not going to be at liberty to say, but they're based out of California, and they have a fair number of locations. He and I worked together, and he was very aggressive back in 2008 when we went through that downturn. And for those of you who remember and look back at that, Extra Space in that time, we did take a hit from an occupancy standpoint, but we never stopped rate increases. We kept with rate increases all through that almost 2-year period when a lot of the smaller operators and even some of the larger operators stopped on rate increases because they were afraid of pushing people out. We didn't, and there was a lot with conversations between he and I and some of the operations people. He's not doing that right now. That's not his intent anyway, is to, he's going to put just send a notice out to their customers that they won't be doing rate increases in the near future. He's going to hold back on that. So that would be one. So we're seeing a lot of our clientele, even though we had some of those lessons in the past about rate increases, that they have, for the community, have decided that it's probably a good PR move to notify people they're not going to be doing rate increases. We're also seeing people stop doing auctions, both online and in-person auctions. In-person because they've restricted gatherings. For example, here in Salt Lake, they've said no, you can't have gatherings of more than 10 people, for example. Other places they're down to 2 or 3, and so they're not doing auctions. I think it's also a good PR move from that standpoint. And when we say they're not doing auctions, that means that they're not doing evictions either. So they've said, hey, if you miss your payment, we're not going to kick you out right now. So that I think there's a PR move that comes along with that. We've also seen for those locations that are closer to universities, oftentimes they will restrict some of their inventory because the university student isn't a great student or a great customer necessarily. They might be a good student, I don't know. Maybe they're not. Somebody should do that study. But we see that they're not typically a great customer because they don't stay a long period of time. They take smaller units and they're not there for a rate increase. But we've seen a lot of our university locations open up inventory because we know those people are coming in. They have no place else to go. They're going to be away for a long period of time. So we've seen that happen. We've seen a big push to contact-free leases and pushing online leases. There've been a couple of companies that have been a little, I wouldn't say behind the times. They've had their reasons for not doing online rentals, but they have moved towards that or turned those on in the last couple of days. Where there's no contact leases. That's happening quite a bit. We're seeing a lot of push towards auto pay and giving incentives for them to do so. That has always been back there, and we've always known that auto pay is a better customer experience, but some people get a little bit lazy about it. And so we're seeing, even just this week, people really starting to push the auto pay under the COVID-19 guise. And offering some sort of like a first month or a free month or something or discount for doing so. And that, I would say those are all on the positive side. On the negative side, I think that, and we can hopefully talk about this a little bit more in a minute as well, but more on the negative side, we're not, maybe negative is not the right term for this, but I think it's still so new, 2 weeks-ish, as I said before, that we're not seeing a lot of testing happening. And at Adigma, we're big believers in testing and figuring new things out, and that the market's dynamic and constantly changing, that we should be looking at tests. A lot of our customers are not quite to that point yet where they're thinking about, hey, how do I learn something from this experience yet? And I think we're still probably a couple of weeks away. Fortunately for all of us, humans are pretty adaptable. So I think why we're still around on the planet at this point. And within the next couple of weeks, people will start to think about that. How do I learn something from this? How do we make this better for us, or understand who our customers are, or what unit sizes make more sense, and how do those things happen? We're not seeing quite a lot of that. We have seen, I guess, on a bright spot, a couple of cases of success when we've run ads along the lines of saying something like, hey, finding that spare room for a home office, store your stuff with us. We're seeing some of that have some success, but I think people are still kind of in that wait and see mode in a lot of cases. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So with the marketing approach, Scott, I guess there's some different tactics here. Obviously, there's the important angle of being concerned for customers. This is first and foremost a health crisis, which is different to the GFC 10 years ago. But then also there's the imperative of businesses being in business in order to protect employees and provide an important customer service in the case of self-storage. So, what sort of marketing tactics are you seeing out there, or are you guys applying? What can people learn from what you're doing? Still early days in this crisis period, but what are some of the tactics?
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about some of the numbers that we're seeing and how that's setting what we're doing up, if that's okay for a minute.
Sure.
Okay. So like I said before, the last week looked really strong, but this week we're starting to see demand soften. And that's as of this afternoon when I was looking in preparation for this conversation right now, as it's 9:32 p.m. our time here. So we're a little bit later out, right? So, like I said, in that 14-day cycle, we're starting to see a little bit of softening that's happening there. And it's looking about 10 to 15% lower than the seasonal average than, say, a year or 2 years ago. These numbers look a little bit closer to what our February, a month ago, looks like, which is late winter for us, than they do kind of the end of March numbers. And we would inverse those for the subsequent months for wherever you're at. But so I'm using the seasonality piece because temperatures and weather have a lot to do with seasonality and self-storage, right? And when people decide to use it. So that's why I use that points there. What we're also seeing is that for a lot of our clients, depending on who they are and how we manage their campaigns, we're seeing that their cost per clicks on a digital marketing standpoint are flat. Or when we manage to a flat CPC, that they're losing impression share. All right. And what that means is the demand is softening. And so that the market is increasing, is reacting by increasing its exposure. And so, for example, say you had a cost per click of X, and previously you were getting 30% exposure with that cost per click set rate. What we're seeing now is that where that used to be maybe a 30% exposure, that's probably dropped 8 to 10 points. So you're down around a 22 to 20% exposure on that same cost per click. In the few experiments that we're running where we're increasing those costs per clicks, we're able to maintain that exposure, but the demand pool is shrunken down a little bit, right? So overall demand is going down, and therefore market reaction is that people are bidding that up in that case. All right. So we're running a few tests there, but that's overall we're seeing that way. We're also seeing that, for example, Google local business pages and those pages that Google maintains for your businesses, we run a lot of SEO tests, and we're constantly changing and tweaking those to see how the algorithms are reacting. Those reviews, in a lot of cases, reviews have been turned off because they don't have the staff to monitor those because they've all been sent home. And the updates to those pages are taking a lot longer than they used to be. And there's quite a bit, and they've come out and said as much, that teams have been out or have been kind of furloughed for a little bit. So edits are going to take a longer time. So the work that you may have been doing on SEO, and you would normally see a 6 to 8 week lag in your effort, that's going to be extended out a little bit when you're doing that way. So with those couple of things in mind, then some of the things that we're doing, the counsel we're giving our clients as they come in is, first of all, yeah, we're kind of in a wait and see pattern. It's only been 2 weeks. My hope is that people will adjust, and that within a couple of weeks, we will probably still be on quarantine and lockdown, but that life will resume to some sort of normal. There'll be some normalcy that comes back, and that we'll kind of figure some of this stuff out, because that's typically what happens is we have to adjust, and then we bring back those parts of our life. And that's what I'm hoping happens. So we've said, hey, let's wait and see what happens. We don't think now is the time to necessarily start spending a significant amount more. So we're not advising go out and increase your spend significantly, because it's going to cost a lot and you've got there. But at the same time, we're also not advising that they decrease their spend. We've had a couple clients come in and say, oh, it's the end of the world. Let's decrease our spend. We're in a recession for the next 18 months. And kind of like the smelters in a concrete factory, some marketing efforts are really hard to start back up once you've turned them off. And paid search is maybe the exception there because you can flip that on and off, some display, some of those type of things. But your SEO efforts, some of your social stuff, keeping those things, I would say not just on life support, but a little bit above that is important, because my personal feeling is that we're either going to be just really come down on this and be really strong for the next 2 months and start to come out of this. And I think we're seeing some of those models happen in various countries and in and around Asia, and that things will be able to kick back up pretty quickly because there have been this disruption, but people will still have jobs to go back to relatively quickly. If instead we take a longer period of time and we extend this out, which I think is really a function of how a society chooses to react to this, and we're out, say, doing this for another 6 or 8 months, just the legal nature of how businesses work, they will go out of business and people won't have those jobs to go back, and it'll take some time to get those things up and going again. And then I think we're looking at more of a 2008, 2009 recovery model, which is incremental steps back, as opposed to kind of light the flame back up really quickly if it's a 2-month layout that way. So that's what we're kind of advising our clients right now is say, let's hold tight for a week or two, see what things are and be ready to adjust. We'll continue to provide regular updates, kind of like the conversation we're having right now, what we're seeing when it comes to demand and lag that way. All right. That help?
Yeah, it does. And I guess a question that comes to mind in the next 2 weeks, next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever some sort of shutdown might look like. One of the key questions that the industry here has been grappling with, and I know New Zealand is grappling with at the moment, is self-storage regarded as an essential service? So if I'm a customer, can I get access to my self-storage centre in the event of a more aggressive shutdown? Have you got any comments on that in your market and across the US? Because in some of the US markets, it is being regarded as an essential service. Is that a commonplace, and what's good and what's bad about that?
Oh, great. So you're right. We have clients in, I think, 45 of the 50 states here, with a couple of exceptions there. And almost everyone is slightly different is what we're seeing right now, as far as how they are classifying certain types of businesses. In some cases, it's essential is grocery stores, pharmacies, and hospitals, and that's essential. In some cases, they're more qualifying it on, hey, what's your social interaction going to be? Is it something that you don't have to interact with anybody? Fine, leave it open. Or can it be minimized, right? And so you see, for example, restaurants are doing curbside delivery, where you're not really interacting with anybody a whole lot. You're prepaying and then they're handing you things off. And in those cases, I think both the restaurant industry, obviously, and then self-storage is hoping more for that model, that we can continue to do a contactless interaction and leave things open for that. I think this goes back to, depending on what different societies choose or how they choose to address this situation. I think closing things, and again, this is me speaking personally, I think closing things down like a draconian, hey, let's put everything down, lockdown for 14, 21 days, something like that. And everybody stayed away from everybody else for that time. It's not possible, but if they did, then this would probably be over, from my understanding. That's not going to happen. And so it's a matter of, hey, how many contact points are there going to be between here and there? And then what's the payoff or what's the results of that as it comes along? I'm guessing we're going to find something somewhere in between that and the people hanging out on Bondi Beach this weekend, or the Florida beaches here, right? And it'll prolong this out for some period of time.
So Scott, I was just sort of saying, go back to what you were saying then in terms of contactless. Obviously, it's a time for a lot of the operators that perhaps that don't have that ability, like you said, to curbside pick up from a restaurant, really start looking into that innovation. Really, and as probably as an industry as well. What sort of comments do you have about that?
Yeah. I want to be careful that not to I want to be careful to strike the right tone here with everybody, and that is, look, I'm confident, but I'm also cautious for myself and my family and what we're doing, and what's happening here is something that we as a society and a global community need to address and be after this. But I have a tendency to think about the world as I'm going to make my own weather as opposed to let it rain all over me. And I think there is opportunity to learn in every situation, right? And so that's what I'm looking at this as well. And how are we going to learn from this and make our businesses better? And I think that if you really are a capitalist and you believe that that's the case, then in some cases, some businesses need to go away because if they're just holding on by a string right now, and we have clients right now that we know are over leveraged. And if they lose 10 to 15 points in occupancy, or if they have the same number kind of defaults, that they're going under. And that's unfortunate. And we will feel bad and lose them as a client. But if in a capitalistic environment, that's going to happen. So what we're looking at is we're saying, hey, where is the opportunity to learn and get stronger and better? And you're right. If you haven't been pushing online rentals at this point, now's a good time. If you have that capability and you've got the ability to start looking at that. If you're looking at things like, we talked about some auto pay payments and those type of things. It's surprising to us sometimes we get clients that have 30 or 40 facilities even that still are taking check, or the majority of their checks are coming in through the mail, or people are coming in to make payments, and we're just like, how are you doing this? And you guys know that as well, and a lot of people do, and I'm not poking fun of those people. There's a much more efficient way to do this. But I think there's also some opportunities to look for natural tests that happen here. So who stayed? Who had to leave? What was the unit type that we saw the most churn on? Or where did we see the longest length of stays? Where did we see our acquisition channels move or adjust? Who were our clients that needed? Were they business clients? Were they individuals? Were they older? Were they younger? Where is it more in a mobile environment? I think there's a lot of tests that are going to come out of that that we're going to see. That will happen naturally, and then hopefully within the next couple of weeks, as this becomes a new normal, as I said, that we'll start to develop some testing and thinking about how do we learn from this opportunity, not in again, to reiterate, not in a morbid way, because this is truly horrific what's happening, but from it's our job to continue to push forward and to adapt and survive, and so let's figure out ways that we can do so.
Excellent.
And where do you see the demand coming from, Scott, from your customers? Can you split that into business, into personal, older, younger? Any shift in demand that you've seen over the last sort of 2 to 4 weeks?
Yeah, so I would say it's too early to tell really where that slip in demand is specifically coming from. Like I said, we just started to see it this week, and we're maybe 4 days into the week as we're measuring it. And it's about, like I said, a 10 to 15% slip so far. Now, we try to be a little bit, like, me saying that it's not a week's worth of data. Right. And there may be other things, but what I did is I took all of our accounts across those 45 states, aggregated them up, looked across the board to look at CPCs, look at demand, look at impression shares, look at the conversion rates, all those things. It's not a week's worth of the data. And there is, as everybody knows, there's seasonality involved by week of the month, by day of the week, by day of the year, by week of the year. All those things, and I was comparing against the previous month, against and the last 3 years worth of data that we have there to see, hey, and then try to normalize that a little bit for some of the other things that were going on. So I would not say that with anything definitive that we're seeing this particular segment is where we're seeing the shallowing in demand yet. If we talk maybe in a week or two, I think I'll have a little bit better understanding of where that's coming from, whether it's in specific markets, although I think we'll see markets here in the States affected differently. Like I said, New York and California are much tighter restrictions than we see in, say, something like Kansas or Kentucky, which are still kind of pushing hard to keep businesses and things open. I would guess, though, if we start to look at where the economy is and we look around and seeing the businesses that are closing down, things like restaurants, and where the people who would be employed at a restaurant where they've cut their staff down either completely or down 90+%, the housing near apartment buildings and where those people generally tend to live, and our facilities that are in proximity to those, is going to be, my guess, is where we're going to start to see the impact of that first, from a softening and demand standpoint. I haven't thought enough about it to think if, depending on, like I said, that 2 or 6 to 8 month timetable, if I think those will bounce back the quickest and those will be the biggest opportunity. But I'll be looking at that here, because that's for our clients and our job. That's what it is to do, is to say, hey, yeah, we've lost something here. How do we kind of understand the market that we can come back stronger in? All right.
Probably just got one more question myself, mate. That is, what would be your advice to storage operators? What's the key couple of pieces of data that they should be watching every day as this crisis goes forward, to inform them as to how they can adjust to the current situation? What's the top 2, 3, 4 pieces of data to watch from your perspective?
Sure. Well, depends a little bit on what your business goals are and what data you have available. Correct. If I have, and you guys are operators and you know this as well as I do, I'm looking at a couple of things to begin with. And first of all, I need to understand what my, I think when we start off at Extra Space, like a lot of people, we were operating on an occupancy model. We knew that we wanted to be between 87 and 89% occupancy. We changed that over time to, and it was several iterations to get to a margin model, which meant that we're looking more at lifetime values of customers and cost per acquisitions and some things around those cases with set costs, and it became much more sophisticated over time as we looked at that. So depending on how you're operating your business, I'd be looking at what's my occupancy in relationship to the liens I have on my property, or how my property is leveraged, right? And most people, I think, that are owning or operating properties know that hey, my leverage accounts for 20 to 35% of my property that way, and knowing what that number is and where your break-even point is from an occupancy or from your rental standpoint, and how much you can afford to lose. Be watching that closely, right? With that, I'd be looking also at my churn in conjunction with that. I was looking at my incoming rentals and my pipeline for those, what those are. I would be looking at what pricing I'm getting in relation to that, because all those things they're all related and impacted that way. Generally, as a general thought with Adigma, we don't look at competition a lot, because generally we don't think that the competition is very smart when it comes to pricing, and how they go about their marketing. So that sounds, it's not going to come off real well. I understand that, but I'm just going to stand behind it. But we tend to think that the businesses are going to run themselves, and we have different metrics that we're optimizing to, and we're going to maximize those, right? And regardless of what anyone else is doing. Right now, what we've told our clients and what we're trying to is we do have quite a bit of competitive data, and we are sharing that with them as from a pricing standpoint, which may make it a little easier for them in these cases where we run revenue management to price themselves so that they make sure that they're capturing more of their market share than what they might have been doing before, because a lot of our clients aren't going after market share, but rather after specific customers who have greater lifetime values. Now we're saying, well, we can adjust pricing, and we know what price elasticity means from an occupancy standpoint. We can relate those two things together, and saying, hey, if we adjust prices down, yes, the model has been that we're going to be priced at X, which maybe here, let's look at pricing a set of units at Y, which may be some percentage below that, and see what that does from maintaining their occupancy standpoint, if they're worried about that, if they're starting to lose some occupancy. So I'd be looking at those probably 5 or 6 things right now, is understand where your number is from a leverage standpoint, from an occupancy and revenue coming in standpoint, what your churn is, your cost for those acquisitions, maybe what your competition is a little bit tighter, so that you can be sure that you are not losing a disproportionate amount of your occupancies that comes along, those things. And then I think there's some other things around just in the general market that you can be looking at, things that we all know is day to day, but I think there's some general things around things like, hey, what is your local unemployment rate? How many people filed for unemployment or for some sort of government service? They're posting those on a weekly basis now. I think that's indicative a little bit as you start to see what industries those are coming from and where maybe those people live and how those would affect different facilities you may have, are things that I'd be looking at from more of a macro standpoint.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I haven't got any more questions unless you do, Greggy.
No, I'll be interested to see what happens in a week's time, because for us, obviously, our demand of our particular sizes have started to change. They've actually become smaller in demand. So obviously, it'd be interesting in a week's time to have a revenue management discussion.
Are you guys looking at unit conversions or changing that? Do you have that ability in a short period of time like this?
In short, yeah, we can. We sort of have a bit of flexibility across our store local sites, our group, in terms of our sizes. So obviously at the moment, what I'm tending to find is actually our average size is actually decreasing. Smaller units are higher in demand. But whether that is a trend, as like yourself, Scott, we're only obviously a couple of weeks in as well. So sort of how that plays out over the next week from a revenue perspective, as you mentioned as well.
All right. Do you have a hunch at what's driving that? Do you think it was leading before, or do you think that that's just come on the last couple of weeks?
A combination, I think. I think a combination is those that are storing that have got super, and they still need storage, but they've realised that they've taken a hit on their super, so they're looking at obviously still needing storage, but really condensing down. And obviously here in Australia, obviously when someone takes a self-storage unit, generally it's not head high, so obviously they can really pack it. So an opportunity is obviously, and this is where the demand is for, where there hasn't been demand for smaller units, it can assist.
Well, Scott, really appreciate you sharing your views with the webinar audience. You've been very open with some of the tools and tactics you're using and your experience shares in the middle of the lockdown over there in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the US. We really, really appreciate that. And if it's okay, we wouldn't mind checking in a couple of weeks' time in this rapidly changing situation, just see what is going on in terms of trading conditions, marketing trends, and things like cost per click, etc. that you've touched on. That'd be fantastic to learn from. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Scott.
On behalf of Greg and myself and Store Local, good work, mate. Keep it up, and we'll talk again in the next couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Pleasure's mine. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, mate. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Cheers.